slides, shouldn't I? So you can actually see what I'm saying. Yeah, to help figure out what's on the other side. The panelists are listed on mondaylive.org if you want to dig into who we all are. Just a reminder that the views expressed here are from the persons saying them rather than any organization and company. Please do post your questions and comments on the Zoom Q&A and chat. And if possible, please complete the survey at the end. This slide deck itself is actually available on mondaylive.org. So if you want to go after any of the links that's on this slide, that's where they are. So our agenda today, we'll spend 10 minutes or so talking about sort of new stuff that we've observed in the world and trends and best practices. And then the main part of the show today, we're going to be talking about how COVID is affecting the channel, the BAS channel, the SIs, MSIs distribution, etc. So we're very open to your questions and comments. Before we do that, I'm going to scan through some slides that some of the group have put together. John Petsy talking about retail and health. A couple of interesting articles there. Jim Butler talking about ventilation. I think ventilation is proving more and more to be a key issue for addressing COVID. I tend to have a sort of bigger picture view, and I'm just sort of fascinated about how the future of cities and how we live. And there's this interesting article in New York Times. Ken Sinclair's focused on the trust factor of all of this. Interesting, very interesting way of actually looking at how we're getting through this. Roger has some comments about international trade and the importance of the construction industry for the recovery, the economic recovery side of things. Therese, again, typically talking about the sort of the impact to in Silicon Valley and other areas. Interesting here. Anno quoting an article from WebMD, which is not typically something that we look at, but they're obviously talking about the impact of air conditioning for health, so that's important. And Tracy talking about the restaurant industry, as he's quite an expert in that. So without further ado, I'm going to put it back to the group here. Anybody want to volunteer to jump in and sort of support any of the links that you put in the cloud in the slides, or talk about anything else? Open it up.
I can do that. The WebMD thing was interesting. It was actually brought up by one of my guys. Unusual sort of reference, but they talked about, again, fresh air cycling. But their focus, if you saw, was that fact that, southern states coming into summer, it's getting very hot. To get ventilation up, of course, you need to bring outside air, but that's a very costly proposition. So how do you balance the two between trying to bring in lots of fresh air, especially in the southern states when we go through the heat that we're going through?
Okay, willing to jump in. I'm working on this next article talking about building community trust. And this is starting to become a big factor in whether people trust us that we've made the building safe. There's just a whole bunch of things going on. And what I'm seeing is a while back, Therese and I talked about communities of practice in our industry and how important they were. And I see them as the logical building blocks to build trust on, as to pick up these communities of practice and then turn them into communities of trust. And we're starting to see that with ASHRAE, well building, all kinds of existing organizations. Haystack, just a myriad of us are there. We have built trust in the past, but I think it's our job here is to continue that and increase the level of trust of these communities of practice.
Yeah, just a little bit on the slide I put up there. I think certainly there was a report there by CBRE on the estate management for transportation, and saying that, you know, during this period where people have struggled to fulfill orders, there's now likely to be a push of where we're going to see manufacturing and distribution and logistics move more remotely. So you probably see an increase in, I mean, we already saw it beforehand, but warehousing and distribution, and also perhaps local manufacturing, because as we know that whilst it's been through this phase of everything being manufactured in one location at a cheap location, but quite honestly, as robotics and automation comes in the factory, the labor costs get reduced anyway, and raw materials tend to be similar around the world. So it could be a time where you now start seeing local manufacturing and distribution come back rather than centralized manufacturing.
Anything else, John?
Yeah, my take is, you know, the sun is higher in the sky. It's streaming in through the window, but a lot of days feel like March with more recent news, you know, and that's one of the things I've, you know, often contributed news articles to is just the conflicting information in business in different geographic areas. And, you know, I see that as a drag to all types of business, right? You see how hard restaurants are being hit, but seems like, you know, the economic pressure across the board, you know, continues because of the, you know, there isn't a clear path out, right? Never mind one that we have a date for. It seems very murky to me, you know, so.
Something to me are the geographic hotspots that we're seeing, especially in Arizona. If you are looking at the news, 27% of all tests are positive in Arizona right now, which is extraordinary. So there's also news out of Florida. So I think we're looking at some distribution of issues here that are based simply on geography and the policies of the states in terms of opening too soon, or whatever their remedial activities have been, they're either working or not. That's what I'm paying attention to right now on a national basis.
I'll just jump in. I didn't post anything this week, but two things. I shared it with our group earlier. Is one, we're starting to see that people are starting to get creative with buildings. For example, Rice University is building 9 new classrooms, all of which are outdoor. They're using circus-type tents and semi-permanent structures in order to do that. And the picture that I sent to the group earlier shows that the various HVAC systems and things like that are part of it. So again, I think that's showing some ingenuity and some creativity we're starting to see. And then another interesting post was that I posted on LinkedIn was how a fully automated restaurant is beginning to open up in New York City. And those of us who are old enough on this call can remember the automated cafeterias and automated restaurants way, way, way back in the day. It's interesting how what goes around comes around. So again, a different spin. They're being very, very creative here to overcome COVID situations.
What's going on in Europe, Roger?
Well, I mean, most countries are seeing a decline, obviously, in cases and deaths. So there have been some pretty tight lockdowns. Here in the UK, great news is the pubs are open again, which is always a good sign. But it kind of goes down. But I'm sure there will be a kind of small cyclic thing as more socializing goes on. And that's happening across Europe. You're seeing a small spike and then dripping off again. So it's going to be that kind of control loop type thing before it goes is going to be heading down. But from that point of view, and I think we're seeing, as I put in the on my slide, is the construction is very quickly back. I think we're going to see a very, there was a lot of, the pipeline was pretty big before we went into it. And I think that's going to continue on now, perhaps for the next 12 months. But I think beyond that, I think it's likely that that will take a pretty big drop off until people recognize, what is going on and what's going to be happening with buildings. I think there's people already saying they were going to go back in buildings, but then again, 50% of UK people are still saying, oh, we're not going back yet, we don't know what to do. So people are still in two minds because they're concerned, that there is still a lot of cases and they don't want to spike it off again. So I think there's still this reticence to actually return to any sort of normality, even though there is a potential to do it. So I think it's going to be a very slow period between now and the end of the year for anybody going back to work, because you still got to travel in and get there. So, but I think pretty much the pipeline that was going on for construction is going to get completed. Not all of it, but those that are committed will continue on, and we'll see that happen over the next 12 months.
Okay, so let us, if there's no other sort of comments, let's get into the main topic of today, which is really the how the pandemic is impacting the channel. And so I'm going to bring in to stage here a couple of guests, Brian Turner, and I believe this user is actually Brian Oswald, but doesn't say Brian Oswald, so I hope I got the right one. So, hey Brian Turner, hey Brian Oswald.
It is.
Yes, good. So let me sort of pose the first question before we get into a sort of a free flow. What are you two seeing in terms of the impact to your businesses as we've sort of over the past 4 or 5 months struggled through this pandemic across the world? Maybe Brian Turner, if you can start, and then.
Yeah, sure. So the immediate impact was, a lot of our MSI business is national, and so it's a lot of enterprise class customers. Those are the people that tend to spend money and have large portfolios. And so what we saw several of them do is just pull 2020 budgets completely off the table and put them into 2021. That was almost an immediate response. So that was on, kind of, I would say, development work. On the other side, kind of echo Roger's statement about people continuing work that was in development. So we had this kind of dichotomy of things going on. So while we're losing, or business is getting shifted until 2021 for a good portion of business, we're also winning and securing brand new contracts during all of this time, right? So people continued to work, and we learned how to secure contracts over Zoom meetings, and obviously decreased our travel budget, and we're figuring out, and fortunately we had spent a lot of time and effort over the last several years figuring out how to do projects remotely and with secure communications and implementing secure technologies. And so by being able to do that and already being used to working in a remote manner and having integrators kind of spread all throughout the country, from a get work done perspective, it really had minimal impact on us. Our field technicians were the only ones that couldn't go to the field anymore. And so we just had to turn them on and kind of teach them a new process for remote working, maybe pre-configuration. And then once construction started opening up again, we were able to get back onto those projects. But I would say the biggest impact on us has been that institutional or that enterprise class customer, and the ones that are spending money every year based on consumer confidence. And when consumer confidence was destroyed in a very short period of time, that had immediate impact. And I would say right now the certainty level of that coming back in a known timeline is still very low. I'm optimistic that it's coming back. I just don't know when. Right now it'd be great if it came back January 1, but I'm a little more pessimistic. I think we're going to see, even if consumers are able to get back into some level of normal with their spending, whether it be remote or with distancing or whatever else it might be, that we're going to be still months beyond that before these enterprise class entities start really opening up the pocketbooks again, because as you said, commercial office buildings are not opening very quickly. I'm in my office. We just got back in our office 2 weeks ago. Of my 30 people that work out of this office, 3 come here. And that's, you know, the good thing is it doesn't impact our workability. They're all very capable of working from home and working remotely. But there's still a high level of anxiety. I mean, this building is maybe 20% occupied from normal. And so I rarely see another human when I'm here. So the chances of spread here are very low. But of course, everybody is anxious to come back into any kind of normal because they're afraid of increasing spread. So, you know, I would just say uncertainty, which is probably a term you guys are throwing around all the time, because that's certainly what I would say is the biggest impact on our business.
Thanks, Brian. How about you, Brian Turner? How are you seeing things?
Brian Oswald.
Yeah, no, I agree with a lot of Brian's comments regarding uncertainty and what the future might hold. You know, from a business perspective, though, we've done quite well. And a lot of that's because of our strong partnerships with e-commerce organizations. So obviously this was a big boom for them, which then led to big business opportunities for us. The other thing that we saw coming out of this whole engagement or this experience with COVID is this increased demand for remote monitoring services. You know, again, it was something that was nice to have maybe a couple of months ago, even a few years ago, but now it's transitioned into more of a need to have because if you don't have people in the buildings, you don't have people running the buildings. So thus the need for remote monitoring. So we're really excited about where that's going to take our service offering. And we're seeing a lot more interest in that than we have before. So still a lot of people talking about smart building technologies and things like that, but it seems like we're getting back to the core of building operation functionality and how we can do that better, smarter, more efficiently, utilizing less people. So, you know, from a construction industry standpoint, I had saw a report early on that said, you know, we're not going to expect returns of 2019 levels until 2024. I think that's probably tracking fairly accurately. I think you're going to see a lot of people push the projects through that were on the books, maybe queue up some for 2021 that were already started or near starting, but everything else I think is going to be a little bit slower as people try to figure out what this new environment is for them. We're not fully returned to the office yet. We're working towards our plan to do that. But we're, you know, much like Brian said, there's still real concern out there from the individuals who are going to operate these spaces, and whether or not it's on a partial return or full return is yet to be determined. So it's, you know, that problem's, you know, from my standpoint, being part of CBRE, that's not unique to CBRE. I think that's true of any retail or real estate provider, Cushman, JLL, you name it. And it's something that they're trying to figure out as time goes on. As the numbers start to increase, obviously it's going to play a bigger toll in it, or bigger role in what we do moving forward. You know, if anybody thinks that moving into January 1 of 2021 is going to be like a light switch and we're going to return to normal, I think that's a little far-fetched. You know, we're less than 6 months away from that. I don't believe many people thought we'd be living the environment we're living as long as we have so far. And as every month goes on and the conditions change, the variability of what the future holds also changes. So again, very blessed to have the opportunities that we have and the growth that we've seen during this pandemic. But I think the long-term toll on general construction is real, and it's something we have to prepare for.
Great, thank you. Thanks.
The question, I guess, for both of you is that, you know, a couple of product companies I've been working with are not doing so bad. They've been down 10% or a little bit. But I think that's because a lot of the companies who are buying the products are smaller companies, and they've still got to pay the rent and feed the kids sort of thing. So they're kind of finding a way, whereas the bigger corporates are the ones that are taking it steady and being careful because they're not quite sure what they should do. So I think the smaller SIs and the people out there have been trying to find a way to actually continue on. And so you're still seeing some product orders, which has kind of kept the flow. And then by cutting costs because you're not traveling, you're not doing shows and stuff, it's not really affected those product companies too much. I mean, is that the same for both of you?
Yeah, I would say our product purchases are pretty flat right now, year over year. In fact, in a couple of lines of business, they're actually up. In a couple of lines, they're up 20%. But a large number of that was just because Q1 was tremendous. I mean, looking at Q1 year over year, in fact, I don't think we had a Q1 ever that was as profitable or had as much revenue in our history. So it was really strong. And then back to Brian Oswald's point, the amount of construction that was going and the backlog that was going was huge. And so I think that while we had that blip of where everything was locked down, and then as construction started releasing, we both on our distribution side, we saw orders coming in, and then on our integration side, we were able to go back out to the world and start executing work. And so I agree with Brian. I think that's short, and I think Roger, you said it too, that construction is going to finish by and large with what was started, what was in the queue. But then the other opportunity that I actually think there's going to be a short blip of time where we see a downward trend for product sales. But I think as people are re-envisioning what buildings need to be, and re-envisioning what restaurants need to be, re-envisioning what all of these things need to be, there's going to be another opportunity. Because if people only come back to commercial office space in 30 to 40%, then that means they're going to have to do something with that square footage, and humans are innovative. We're not going to just sit there and let those buildings rot because nobody wants to work in them. We'll figure out the next thing, and that presents a huge opportunity to MSIs who are willing to look at things differently and provide that. And kind of the whole reason to be an MSI is because we look at things differently. So I think us and Brian's company and other MSIs will actually see a boom on the flip side of this once people have figured out what buildings need to be, post-COVID.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. I'll just add real quick to that. For us, our product sales have increased, but it's directly related to the volume of work we're doing, which again is tied to that growth within the e-commerce business. Now, that being said, we're starting to see more diverse products coming to the market, but more, I would say they're specific problem solving capabilities. Now, 6 months ago, a year from now, it would have been just considered a general IoT device. Now they slap on occupancy sensing device, and all of a sudden people's interest perks up because that's what their new focus is, right? So I think the overall, the technology is the same. The way their companies are marketing the technology is a little bit more specific to solving COVID problems, which is getting a lot more attention.
Sensors have become systems.
That was kind of my question too, Brian. Do you see a sense of, or change the sense of, from energy focus to other focuses as a result? Are customers looking for different solutions?
Yeah, so it's funny, energy teams have become occupancy health teams, and much more focused on air quality, air changes. Obviously, we've all been reading, from ASHRAE or from CDC around, what your air has to be in a building. And at the end of the day, it comes back to, Title 24 in California has been that way forever. But for a lot of our enterprise class customers, they haven't been running continuous fans in other states. They haven't been using MERV 12, 13, 14 type filtration in their air handlers. They haven't been really monitoring outdoor air. They really don't care about their economizer. And I would say that while the focus has certainly been elevated there, and the companies that have energy teams have certainly shifted their focus away from pure energy, they're still not making a lot of strides yet. They're in a lot of ways, what we're seeing is a wait and see approach, where they will do everything they can with the systems they have. So to one point Brian was making, we're busier than we've ever been. It does feel like that, but what we're busier than we've ever been is doing more software work. We have a lot of people coming into our cloud and into our service business. And so what we've had is clients saying, hey, you need to help me report on our indoor air quality. You need to help me report on our fresh air changes. You need to help me report. You need to help me systematically shut down buildings that are less occupied or not occupied at all. And then on the flip side, you need to help us systematically bring buildings back up, and you need to help us flush. And so there's a lot of labor sales going on right now, back to Roger's product. So even though we're really, really busy, that doesn't always translate into new products going in as much as it is maybe more implementation of control strategies or even analytic strategies that we had talked about a lot. And like back to Brian's point about this whole monitoring thing, we talked about things we could do, but now those things we could do, we've spent a lot more time actually doing them over the last 6 months.
In that context too, do you see any changes with the whole IT cyber guys? Are they still playing a big role, or is that less of a role?
No, it's still very much a big role. So I would say, so Brian talked about a bunch of opportunities with new projects because of, in response to all the demand that they were getting. So we've seen similar, so data centers are big clients of ours, and we've seen data centers investing in their own IT infrastructure. So not just providing houses for other people to put servers and communications equipment in them, but they're investing a lot. And so our IT business has exploded over the last 6 months, directly in response to getting their stuff more under control, securing their environment better, where that was always a vision of theirs. Like these clients, they always thought that they needed to pay more attention to their own critical infrastructure for their back of house. But I would say this kind of catapulted that and really put a lot more focus on it. So that part of our business has been really busy. Again, it's always been a part of our business in the building centered side. So we're always having that conversation. And I would say it continues. And I think it will continue. I don't think this has had any negative connotation or any negative impact on the cyber side. Nobody's decided, hey, forget cyber, we need to get more healthy. It's still right there in the conversation.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with Brian on that one. And for us, we still actively have those conversations. They might not be the top of the priority list anymore. In some cases, the conversations are ongoing, but now they've moved to more of, what technology could I deploy to get people back into their space and feel comfortable, or what changes would we need to make to the system and things like that. So it's still front and center. It just may not be, at the top of the list just because of the way they're reprioritizing their spend right now.
So Carol posed a question. I'm not sure whether you can actually comment on this. Wondering if are you seeing employees sort of encouraging work at home by giving money to them to buy equipment or to do other things at home? Are you seeing anything like that?
So we've changed policies. So we always provided equipment for everybody, but for all of the employees that recently had to go and work from home, we've actually absolutely given them budgets to acquire monitors or mouse keyboard, et cetera. We also allowed them to take the stuff home. We had a lot of stuff sitting around in an empty office, so we allowed them to relocate that stuff. And then we've also implemented policies around paying a monthly stipend for internet connectivity, because as we now require that if you're going to be on video, you have to have your camera on. That means you have to have a camera. Means you have to have bandwidth at home that's capable of working with that. We've also had to upgrade some of our machines to be able to support the video cards and et cetera, those things for supporting Zoom and these different technologies. So I would say yes. I mean, as an organization, you've got to empower your people to work effectively, and these tools are required today.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
So this is Mark. I have a question for the both of you. Have you noticed in conversations with your clients that they are asking for, let's just call it COVID accreditation type programs or labels, that they meet certain standards and then they in turn can put that label on their respective buildings. Have you heard from them? And as part of your approach, are you looking at that to then offer that as an additional service opportunity for them?
Personally, haven't heard from them for that specific ask, Mark. However, we are looking into it. I think part of that is just trying to figure out who would set that standard, right? I mean, I don't know if anybody's really willing to stick their neck out there and say you're COVID safe just yet from a liability standpoint. But there are enough guidelines that can be followed, and technology that could be deployed where that could become something of the future. And it's definitely something we keep an eye on as things continue to progress in that specific topic.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Real quick, Steve, before the only thing I would say we're trying to do, and we're trying to educate our end users on, is the data that they track, and maybe the relevance data. So if we haven't been calculating air change, let's make sure we start doing that. If we haven't been calculating, if we haven't been measuring CO2 levels indoor and outdoor, let's add a few sensors and start tracking that, because we don't know what kind of information is going to be needed down the road to provide to a tenant. And whether it's a tenant like us in our own building, where I've got 30 people that would like to come back to the office, but they're concerned. And back to Ken's point earlier about trust. Tenants don't trust building owners right now. I mean, just talk to my employees who are in this business. They don't trust them at all. We don't do the controls here, but we certainly know what's not being done here. And I have a feeling that trust isn't going to come back for a long time. And so the more data that we can prepare our clients with to actually build that trust story, the better. So Mark, that's really what we're trying to do. I have not heard anybody ask for a COVID, certification. Wouldn't surprise me, but I agree with Brian. I'm not sure who wants to put their neck on the line for that.
So Brian's, my question, you'd mentioned about your commercial clients wanting to improve the filtration, go to MERV quality filters if they didn't have them. But that's more of a passive solution. From an active standpoint, have you seen companies wanting to put in UV or bipolar ionization technologies into the air, into the ductwork? Because I'm seeing that on the low-level commercial. My dentist's office, for example, a lot of homeowners I speak to are doing that in their homes. Are you seeing it at a commercial level where they're taking those kind of steps?
So I have one client who's doing a pilot on a project. It's going to cost them $250,000 to do one building. They have 3,000 buildings. So to expect that they would
wow,
try to spend that kind of money to do bipolar ionization is ridiculous. They're not going to do it. But on the flip side, they also have the opportunity to go fix all their economizers, because right now they can't do flushes, they can't do fresh air control, they can't kind of lead with fresh air and only close it as they can't condition it, right? They can't come up with real strategies until they go fix some of these things. So while I agree MERV filtration is passive, when you start to look at what ASHRAE is really requiring, they're just saying, hey, follow the guidelines we've already set. They're not, and maybe you increase from MERV 12 to MERV 13 or 14. I don't know if any of you guys have seen the study that was just done by University of Oregon, where they've actually found with a MERV 15 filter, they've actually found COVID-19 particles downstream of the fan. So meaning it got all the way through the return, made it through the filtration, made it through the fan, and ended up downstream. Now, of course, it wasn't any concentration that can make anybody sick, but the fact is we're still learning about this, and we're going to keep learning about it. The ionization certainly does have this idea, or some studies have shown that it kills this bacteria and these viruses. And it even says some of them claim to have a shelf life or a half-life of 5 minutes, meaning they will actually kill it when they come through the supply and land on surfaces, that they'll continue to kill the surface particles. So, I mean, there's a lot of promise to it, but at $250,000 per site for 20 air handlers, I don't see that scaling and becoming a viable solution for everyone. So until that comes down, I don't see it.
Yeah, so Patrick Davis just talked about hydrogen peroxide, because I came across that this week as well. Any awareness of that in the industry from you guys?
No, not anything that I've seen. The bipolar ionization is probably gotten the most attention, but that one's new to me.
Yeah, because it's interesting. You can actually basically introduce it and it travels throughout. It's intended to travel everywhere. It adds a low level of hydrogen peroxide into all of the air. And then when it, so regardless what space you're in, as long as that space is being, there's air changes going in it, it's seeing hydrogen peroxide, which will kill the viruses continuously.
Yeah.
How about touchless options?
Regarding like entry,
or both, you know.
Yeah, that's stuff like that, Mark, is absolutely getting a lot of attention right now. I would tell you that the bulk of what CBRE has done in the last couple of months to help owners reoccupy their space has been around entryway, whether that's through health screenings, touchless entries, occupancy sensing. So that is absolutely getting a lot of attention, and that's done. Sometimes that's outside of our scope of work because the door manufacturers provide some of that. You're seeing an increase in access control capabilities, but again, it's got to be somewhat limited because you can't touch anything. So I think some of that technology is yet to be determined, but there's definitely an increase in awareness of it and people who are doing a fair amount of implementation.
I just wanted to speak to a minute to process and human behavior. I had a friend who's in the property appraisal business in Orange County. Their office happens to be in a 15-story building somewhere in Orange County. And in that building, somebody on some floor had COVID. And the property manager had to let every business in that building know, having that sort of procedure in place, to let everybody in the building know that, yes, somebody on some floor that was using those elevators tested positive, and you should know that. And she said she felt somewhat reassured that there was some process in place, but at the same time, being in the business of property appraisals in downtown areas, she said, the impact this is going to have on real estate of people not wanting to come to work and having to assess the risk on that, having that be part of her job. She said, looking at the ASHRAE sites and the CDC sites, nothing is making her feel sure that any of these filtering steps or air changes really is going to be adequate to impact the risk assessment.
No, I would say the thing that the ASHRAE guidelines are saying is that you have to have, there's a difference between having a system that meets Title 24 or ASHRAE standards where you actually have air changes and you have the required air changes versus a restaurant who has no ventilation and is just blowing a fan. So I think that's one of the myths that they were trying to dispel, is that every building is just as susceptible as the next one from getting it passed from one table to a next, for example, in a restaurant setting, or from one cube to another. So if you have the proper ventilation, you can get it, or you can minimize the transmission. But the idea of how you can get it from contact, and I've seen different studies that say it's either I've seen most studies that say contact like physical from door to mouth is not likely, or it's very low transmission rate, but it's still possible. And no air changes are going to affect, what somebody's touching. What somebody's touching is what they're touching. So that goes back to the touchless. I know our building, which I would say is a mid-rise, it's the holy grail. If you listen to the manufacturers about automation, it's the next big wave. If we can get all these buildings of this size to put automation in, then we'll all be a lot richer. This building doesn't typically. However, on the access control, you know, they're investing in all of the tenants using their own device to access, no more cards that they're having. They're investing in, you know, putting automated doors at all entries and all restrooms. The one thing they haven't done is putting those automated doors at every tenant entrance, which goes back to the point Brian was making. If you can get all of your doors to be touchless, and then from a tenant perspective, the things we're doing is, you know, making sure that everybody has their own hand sanitizer, their own set of wipes, so that you're not sharing. And we've effectively gotten rid of all things that people share. So you go to our kitchen, and there are no utensils that you get to share. There's no single use anything or that you're going to have. You have to bring your own stuff. You clean your own stuff, and you're the only one that comes in contact with your own stuff. So I would say it's really minimized the services we can provide. I know from the tech firms, you know, they've gotten rid of all of their, you know, lunch and meal plans. And so I know that's had a big impact, and I don't know that any of that stuff will come back in the near term.
Question for both Brian and, well, both Brians. Have you seen any changes in customer buying behavior? In other words, a move away from capital expenses over to SaaS model, and have you had to adapt your business models to accommodate these?
We've supported both, and honestly, we have not seen a change in the way that clients have been purchasing. It's been fairly consistent. You know, clients who wanted a SaaS model typically will buy a SaaS model, and the ones that don't or potentially on the fence kind of remain on the fence and then go buy in the traditional way. So for us, we haven't really seen a change, positive or negative in that regard, or at least not one that COVID has driven a client to make a decision that way. It's been fairly consistent.
So I'll have a different answer. And I think it really depends on the market that you're serving. So we serve commercial real estate, healthcare, data centers, pretty large contingent of retail. And we've seen very different responses from each one of those verticals. So healthcare, for example, continued spending all the way up until they had to start shutting or laying people off because they had, you know, projected this huge response. They stopped all elective surgeries, stopped a lot of patients coming in. Patients who might have normally gone to the doctor are afraid to go to the doctor, so they're not going in. So the revenue side of a lot of the hospitals we deal with has gone down, which makes them actually contract spending. And actually, even on capital projects, they've maybe extended time frames, right? So we have absolutely seen that. And, you know, all we can do is respond and try to be as supportive as possible and try to figure out other ways where we can help them and still gain or get access to some of that revenue and even help them shift some of their attention back to the operations side and maybe help them improve how they respond on the operations side. You know, retail, obviously a big impact. You know, a lot of retail had to shut down. And you know, of course, they're going to move money around. They're not going to continue spending when there's so much uncertainty in retail. Commercial office buildings, another big amount of uncertainty, right? So I would say if you're in the right verticals, you could be absolutely completely slammed. If you're in the wrong verticals, you could be, you know, in a complete danger mode right now. So, and I would say we have enough mix that we've seen some increase on some aspects of our business and definitely negative on others. So it just depends on what verticals you're serving.
So the mission of this group is to figure out what's going on through the pandemic, which is really what we've been talking about. The second part of the mission is trying to sort of figure out what life is going to look like in this industry after this is over. Now, we obviously don't know when that is, but let's say 2 years out. Hopefully, all this be over by then. And you know, there's this thing that says that it's a shame to waste an emergency not to change, not to fix things, not fix problems that is sort of been hampering us. So sort of in that, with that as a background, do you see, how do you see life? How do you see this industry 2 years out moving forward? Is there some new paradigm that could be implemented that we can actually work towards?
Yeah, it was interesting. One of your comments to kick off was the lower traffic, right? So one of the things that has absolutely proven it out, the day that we were issued a stay-at-home order, it had zero impact on our work the following day. We were already using all of this remote technology. Just many of our people were still in the same office. But out of 80 employees, 50 of them were already working in some remote capacity. And so some of the things that I would see is people who are driving longer than half an hour to get to our office. I don't see them coming to the office any more often than maybe once or twice a week. And that would be for the benefits of the in-person collaboration, because I still think is helpful and as good as this technology is for communicating, I think there's still benefit to the longer in-person team meetings when you can do whiteboard sessions and that sort of thing. So I do think that there's going to be a long-term impact on that. If I've got people that live an hour and a half away, the last thing I want them to be doing is driving, because I am actually getting more work out of them. Their quality of life's a little bit better. And when they're able to go back to work, I don't actually think they're going to want to get back in the car for 3 hours a day to get to and from work. So I think that'll be a huge impact. And then what that also opens up for us as a management team is I don't have to look locally as often. We've got people kind of spread all over the US and in Canada, but now I really can open up my recruiting to make that more the norm rather than the exception. So I think those are two kind of lasting impacts that we see will definitely be there.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with Brian on that. And we experienced some of that ourselves. For roles that we thought we couldn't execute in a remote capacity, we're doing quite well in. And it's really changed our viewpoint on how we move forward and whether or not those people physically need to be in an office environment. I am in full agreement, though. The technology is great. I don't believe we'd be as successful as we are today had we not seen the improvements in video conferencing technology. However, that personal touch, as this thing goes on, what we've even noticed within our organization is, fewer and fewer people jump on the video. They'll jump on a call, but not necessarily turn on their video. Or you lose some of that. We just had a leadership meeting where typically the first 10 minutes or 20 minutes is all about catching up. Well, when we started, as time has gone on, when we did it remotely, less and less of that occurred, and we jumped right more into the business discussion. So you lose that personal connection that I think makes a very strong culture within your organization. And culture really is what makes you a successful player in this space. So that's definitely one thing. And the other is just people's mindset on remote operation. I think it really is changing, again, for people who thought it was a nice to have, it's really transitioned into a need to have. They've been putting it off or believing they could do it with the resources that they had. And now it's becoming a much more front and center topic of conversation that I think is going to continue to move forward as this pandemic continues to play out.
Yeah, actually, one of the links I posted, Anto, was actually from Cushman Wakefield, APAC. And it's a great report on their analysis of remote. People want to work remote and who don't. And they've come up with this term they call the total workplace ecosystem, right? Where it's going to be a broader spectrum than just the office. It's the office, it's the home, it's the coffee shop, and what's the ecosystem that you put around that. It's kind of an interesting report and the numbers on that too.
One of the things that was, in this call we were talking about is the MSI. I'm quite hopeful that the MSI role grows as people are becoming more aware about buildings. This whole thing has certainly raised the profile. And I'm hopeful that it means that we'll get closer to the end users and people, at the end of the chain rather than the traditional mechanical contractors and in-betweens, because people now want to see a lot more about what happens with the information and how it can be used and the space management we talked about before. So I'm kind of hoping that eventually the MSI role as the OT and IT gets closer and the information that's available, starts attracting more attention from the end users. And as an industry, we get a little bit closer to them than we have been traditionally.
So touching back on the the SaaS versus CapEx, which is something that this group has talked about quite a bit over the past few weeks. Do you think, again, putting it to the sort of the long-term future once we get over this, is that a trend that is likely to go towards the SaaS model much more? Do you sense that?
So I sense that was already happening. I don't think COVID has made that more or less. I think in some respects, like Brian mentioned earlier, we're being tasked to do more of it with so maybe we had clients that limped in a little bit, so they were kind of dabbling in SaaS. And then when this happened, they recognized, shoot, I've got a lot of power available to me. Let's use it more. And so I think we've had people who were already in go deeper. We have had a lot more inquiries, and I think that's what Brian was saying too. The inquiries are there. The kind of jumping off and actually buying it are still not there. But I would say the trend was going before this to a SaaS model. I think people understood that those of us who have been around for 20 years know that the computer under the engineer's desk is a thing of the past. And now even the server inside the IT closet is becoming a thing that they don't want to deal with. They don't want to manage the operating system. They don't understand the IoT technologies. They understand how to, and even a lot of this is being driven by IS and IT, while they're even moving a lot of their stuff out of the physical building into more of a data center centered IS solution. So I think that's going to happen, and I think the trend will continue. I'm waiting for the hockey stick growth. I do believe it eventually will hit an inflection point where that will be the norm, and for people that are doing everything on-prem will be far less normal. I don't think we're there yet, but I think we're still progressing.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with Brian on that. I mean, we've offered SaaS to clients. We can offer financing to clients through different models, especially, through some of CBRE's partnerships. And it's just, the interest level's there, but not always, not always the go forward. Part of that is, I think it's confusing right now. I mean, every product that comes to market seems like it comes in a SaaS offering. So, when clients start to evaluate this, they're looking, well, this one's SaaS, this one's SaaS. Now, all of a sudden, it's kind of like, your cable system at home, right? Everyone dropped DirecTV or Time Warner or Spectrum, and they picked up all this pay-as-you-go. Well, the next thing you know, you got $150 in pay-as-you-go, whether that's through HBO or Disney Plus, or it's kind of the same thing. So I think people are trying to get their heads wrapped around, what is my total cost when I'm looking at all these different offerings, and every one of them's through a SaaS model, and what am I really gaining by that? So I think that's what keeps some people on the fence, but there's true value in that approach, and it's one that we believe in as well. And I'm with Brian. I'm just kind of waiting for that hockey stick to occur. It will. It's just the timing of it's yet to be determined.
It's the purchasing departments that are most used and attuned to buying a SaaS model. It's the more traditional facility departments that are not. They buy projects, they buy capital expenses. And I think that's the challenge that we're seeing right now in this part of the industry, is selling to a facilities group and not having them with the tools necessary to justify and validate based on SaaS model terms. They're more used to the project-based, direct results oriented type of ROI.
One of the interesting things that we've seen as we've diversified more into the services and recurring revenue model is some of those traditional customers you're talking about, Leighton, instead of signing a contract for a monthly recurring for 4 years or 5 years or whatever it might be, we've had a few that just said, look, I just want to pay for 5 years up front. Is that okay? So that's how they kind of see it in their heads. It's the same as a capital purchase then. They're just got 5 years worth of monthly monitoring happening. So
yeah,
kind of interesting that you pointed that out.
We've had that too, but I tend to think that and we've seen this, when people do that, buy 2-3 years as part of the project, sometimes 5, you have a couple of issues. One, from an accounting perspective, you've definitely got to have an accounting platform that will help you recognize that revenue as it's coming across those multiple years. But the other thing is you haven't really got operations bought in. And so when that end of life comes on that contract and you're like, hey, you owe me another 30 grand for the year, like, whoa, what are you talking about? And now you're reselling it. And so we've actually found some success in presenting both models and actually getting IT involved very early, because a lot of times, back to Lake's point, IT is responsible for those recurring revenue budgets, especially when it comes to a SaaS type model, because that's typically not considered a facility spend. And so getting them involved, and we've already got to get them involved from security anyway. So when we can bring those topics up during construction for this is how we're going to build your facility and this is how you're going to operate your facility, it really gets much better buy-in. The other thing is even working with like a JLL or CBRE or some third-party management, we're even talking to them during construction. We know this is going to be managed by a third party. The expense is actually going to be held by them, not by the building owner or the contractors. And so getting them engaged so that they understand that it's now part of their budget and this is how the building is going to be operated. And so I would say that's all encouraging, and it's all contributing to what's eventually going to be a hockey stick growth, because the more pieces of how buildings are operated post-construction that get involved for making these decisions, the better off for all of us that are offering those services.
It sounds like both of you have kind of trended more towards the services side of the business over the years, as opposed to the more traditional distribution model. One of the things that we've noticed is our traditional distribution is getting more commoditized all the time, a little bit trickier to deal with. Have you guys noticed anything like that in your businesses?
I think, honestly, that issue is starting to occur in just people who call themselves MSIs. We don't run a traditional distribution business. It's purely based on MSI and turnkey building automation projects. And with the amount of people that claim to offer that same level of service, it can dilute the offering a little bit, or at least at the very least the quality of what we can provide versus somebody who doesn't traditionally play in this space. So, I mean, Brian, you deal more on the distribution side or product distribution side, so I'll let you answer to that one.
Yeah, so our answer was, I mean, a lot of you guys know we separated in 3 business units, and we did that specifically to address this problem. So the Control Co business, which is distribution, absolutely that product line, that's commodity. Adding value as a distributor has become increasingly difficult as manufacturers have made devices that are more and more intelligent, right? So contractors don't need as much help once they get training and certified. The products are pretty intelligent, and they're even going to get more intelligent and self-programming. And I think I have a lot of confidence in what technology is doing there. On our contracting business side, so OTI is both the MSI and the contractor. And what we've really focused on is when we're an MSI, we try not to do the controls. Because we believe that the MSI really needs to be focused on a lot more aspect of the facility than the HVAC controls. When we do controls contracting in the traditional space, that hasn't changed much. They don't really want us to be an MSI. They might want us to be an integrator. They might want us to integrate some power and some lighting, but those are kind of the 3 cornerstone systems that always get integrated: lighting, power, and HVAC. And if you're, or maybe it's not just power, metering in general. So once you start to get beyond that and you start to get into IT and network infrastructure and wireless and all of these other systems and IoT, as an MSI, you really can't afford to have your focus down on any one particular system. You've got to be a lot more broad. And so I think as more building owners want more intelligence in their building and more data, and a contractor specifically focused on how the data is going to be utilized, integrated, how it's going to impact their operations of the building, and how they're actually going to operate the facility for the go forward, I think the MSI starts to take on a whole different look than what people, and I agree with Brian, too many contractors are calling themselves MSIs, because they're really not looking at that. They're looking at it and going, well, I integrate HVAC and metering all the time. Well, that doesn't make you an MSI. There's a whole lot more knowledge required there. And I think as an industry, we've just got to keep defining that MSI for building owners and for architects, engineers. The other thing is, people ask me when I should be involved, and I said, whenever you thought about building a building, you should have me involved. And that's the difference between an MSI and a traditional controls contractor. The controls contractor doesn't need to be involved until the systems are designed and they're ready to start applying which controls vendor they want to use. The MSI, though, needs to be involved very early on with the architect, because they're going to have input across the facility for all the different technologies and all the different use cases and user stories that they're trying to create, right? Whether it's a COVID-19 user story, or how I want to enter the building, or how I want to get my visitors entered into the building and into secure areas or non-secure areas. There's all kinds of things that a true MSI will impact. And it's not just HVAC, even though HVAC might be the most impactful system once you're in there for comfort. It certainly isn't the most impactful system from, the overall work of an MSI.
So we are at the top of the hour, so we need to bring this to a close. I think this has been a great conversation. Thank you, Brian Turner and Brian Oswald, for joining us today. This show will be on YouTube sometime later on tonight. With that, we'll see each other again next Monday on Monday Live. In the meantime, I hope you all have a great week. Thank you all.
Thanks, Anto.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.